woman is last seen walking home from a nightclub in Swindon. She never returns.
She's disappeared in the middle of the night. What could have happened to her? Where is she?
About 400 to 500 members of the public turned up to help search the forest.
Bluebells grow in the spring, and there's lots of deer, owls, and there's quite a lot of rare wildlife. But it's a large expanse. It's around 18 square kilometres, quite easy to get lost.
During the day it's beautiful, it's tranquil, you can hear the sounds of nature. But at night time, when darkness comes, it's the last place you want to be. It's chilling.
The investigation becomes much larger than police could have ever anticipated.
It absolutely shook the community of Swindon. A lot of anger that someone could do this to someone that totally didn't deserve it.
Which, at that point, you could literally have struck me down with lightning. That was not what I was expecting to happen.
Savernake Forest, located in Wiltshire, one of the safest counties in the UK, lies 15 miles south of Swindon, in the southwest of England.
Savernake is a large forest situated just outside of Marlborough, just over the border in Oxfordshire. It extends over many, many acres, and whilst there are tracks and paths through it, large parts of it are effectively wilderness and peaceful, law-abiding place.
A very beautiful place. There are a multitude of different trees, parkland, people take their dogs for walks there, and it's a very popular place, particularly in the summer.
It's really rare for crimes to occur of this nature anywhere, but in rural locations even more so.
That all changes on the 19th of March 2011, when a local young woman is reported missing after failing to return home from a night out.
These kind of incidents are very, very unusual and clearly have significant community impact when they do happen.
It was so unusual for her to go missing in these circumstances, for any girl of that age to go missing in these circumstances.
The missing woman is identified as 22-year-old Sian M. O'Callaghan, an office worker who lives in Swindon.
So Sian was a young woman in her 20s. She lived with her boyfriend. By all accounts, she was a young woman who had her life in front of her, and she had those aspirations and dreams that everyone has in their young 20s.
Sian was a very popular girl. Lots of people knew Sian. She had lots of friends.
Everybody who's spoken about Sian was just saying she was a lovely girl.
Sian's boyfriend alerts the police after waking up to find that she never returned home from her walk back from the nightclub just half a mile away.
The first person to call the police was Kevin Reap, who was Sian's boyfriend, and he called the police at about 9:30 in the morning. So as far as he knew, she was meeting up with friends, and they were going to end up in a nightclub in Old Town in Swindon called Suju nightclub.
Saturday night in Swindon would be buzzing. There would be people out and about, going out and enjoying themselves, going to pubs and clubs and restaurants, just like any Saturday night in any town. Just before 3 a.m. that night, Sian decides to break away from her group of friends and decides she wants to go home. And she leaves the nightclub just before 3 a.m. Sian only lived 800 metres away from Swindon town centre. She hadn't far to go. She left on her own, but she wouldn't have been feeling any kind of danger. She had a pleasant evening. She was going home to the house she shared with her boyfriend Kevin.
He'd had intermittent contact with her throughout the evening, but when she didn't turn up by about 3:30, 4:45 in the morning, he sent her a message on her phone asking where she was. Clearly, this message was never answered.
He starts to worry because she isn't responding to his messages, to his attempts to contact her. And he sends a message to her at 3:24 a.m. with one word, worried.
and this was highly out of character. There was no precursor events, there was no arguments, there was no discussion about her leaving. It was an unprecedented event within that family, and there was immediate concern. So her disappearance was treated as a high-risk missing person case.
Boyfriend Kevin is now incredibly alarmed. He gathers together people, friends, anyone he can get hold of, and they start looking around the surrounding area, and they're incredibly concerned.
We get many people who go missing people. There's thousands that go missing every single year. And whilst everyone is treated very importantly, you know those ones which just put the flag up straight away and we go, this is a real concern.
At the time, the Senior Investigating Officer, Steve Fulcher, was my boss. I spoke to him and he asked me to come into Gable Cross Police Station the following morning. He went through the circumstances of Sian going missing and the initial fast-track actions that were being pursued to help identify where she was.
At that point, we are thinking, how can we try and locate Sian? What could have happened? Has she fallen over? Is she hurt in any way? Or is it something a little bit more serious and that someone has taken her and she's come to some harm? So in any high-risk missing person inquiry, we will be utilising the media to try and identify where she could be. We're utilising CCTV opportunities. If we know where someone was, we could be searching that area. We can be making inquiries. We can be looking at our intelligence systems and trying to find out if anybody is in that area at the time that is of concern.
So when a call of a missing person comes into police, uniformed colleagues would be sent out and they would go and speak to the person who had reported them missing. They would search the home to make sure that the person hadn't actually come home and was just in a different place than expected. They would then make initial inquiries with friends and relatives to see if anybody knew where she might be, and then make inquiries with hospitals to see if she'd potentially been injured and ended up in hospital. When these proved fruitless, they then called in a CID where I was working. We were made aware of all the details around her going missing, and as much detail as they were aware of at that point about where her night had led her. Once we'd had a briefing, we were then allocated different jobs to do, and my job was to go and search the route that she would have taken from the nightclub back to her home address that she shared with her boyfriend. Partly my purpose for retracing the steps was A, to make sure she hadn't fallen somewhere and was injured, but B, also to scope for CCTV. And one of the CCTV cameras I located was at a pub called the Goddard Arms, which was not far down the road but on the opposite side of the road to where the nightclub was that Sian had last been seen.
This became the last known sighting of Sian. What we could see from that CCTV image is that when she went out of screen in the building opposite, there was flashing amber lights, which we could hypothesise were from a car pulling up, putting the hazard warning lights on.
The car is stationary. The car is not moving. So that would indicate that the driver of the car had some reason to stay there and to stop. Was he conversing with someone? Was it Sian? Was he talking to her? Was he offering her a lift? The car then drives off and there's no other sign of Sian. The police make inquiries, house to house, door-to-door inquiries in the area. They can't put her past that particular spot. They speak to many people and that is the last known sighting. So the police theory at that time is that Sian got into that car.
The investigation into Sian O'Callaghan's disappearance has escalated to a suspected kidnapping. Police are focused on identifying the car seen in CCTV footage, as the initial hours are crucial to finding her alive. Wiltshire police are investigating the disappearance of 22-year-old Sian O'Callaghan, who vanished after a night out in Swindon in the early hours of March 19, 2011. Sian was last seen on CCTV, possibly getting into a car, and detectives suspect she may have been kidnapped. Their focus is to identify the vehicle and its owner.
it became our preferred hypothesis and Steve's preferred hypothesis that it was that car that had picked Sian up, and we were left with a grainy black and white image of a car. So we'd looked at that image, and various people gave different thoughts on what car it might be. People thought it was a Mondeo, an Audi, a Volvo, various other makes.
The police also found further CCTV footage down the road, this time from a colour camera, that was able to show that the car in question was green and that it had a yellow square on the side of the door, which made police suspect that this was a taxi or a cab.
We were unsure what car it was, but we used some specialist services to try and identify what the car was, and it came back within a very short space of time that it was believed to be a green Toyota Avensis Estate. At that point, we were thinking, well, let's put this out to the media.
Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher used the press to put out press releases asking for anybody with any information about Sian. Friends and relatives of Sian were putting up posters, and they were posting on social media, so as getting the news out as far and wide as possible, so as many people knew that Sian was missing and were able to help look for her.
Coach loads of people came out, stopped what they were doing to go out and look for this missing woman who people deeply cared about. There was grave concern that something could have happened in that small area, particularly to a young female alone at night. If you didn't know about this girl, it was because you hadn't already been out of the house. Her name was everywhere, her face was everywhere.
Any girl of that age that goes missing and could have potentially come to some harm would be a very important case regionally. I think just the nature of the fact that it was so unusual to happen, it became national news, and the media latched onto it because she was an attractive girl who had gone missing and her picture was everywhere. And there was real concern within the community as well.
Sian's boyfriend Kevin made an emotional appeal at a press conference for Sian to come home, and for anyone who had any information as to her whereabouts to please come forward. This was a young man who loved Sian very much, and that comes across in that appeal. And he is desperately worried, desperately concerned. He wants his girlfriend to come home, and he is devastated at the fact that she is missing.
Police see that Sian's phone had been active near Savernake Forest shortly after she went missing, prompting a search by law enforcement and community members.
I think it demonstrates how important it was to the communities of Swindon and Wiltshire at the time, and the priority they placed on it, that people gave up their time to go and search for Sian. And we'd had some information regarding her phone which indicated that she could have been in Savernake, and we didn't appeal for the public to come and try and help us search, but the public had picked up on that, and they responded in their thousands. Literally coaches of people went out to Savernake, and it was logistically quite a challenge for us, because we wanted to make sure that those searches were able to effectively contribute to the searches that took place. We didn't want people duplicating it, but there's also a health and safety issue there as well, because they were walking through forest. It's not even land. Some of them didn't have the right equipment or footwear to be able to do that. So it's tricky, because you don't want to refuse people, because they're trying to help you and they're trying to help find Sian, and that was what we were all trying to do. But at the same time, you don't want anyone else to be hurt or harmed as a result of their good intent.
I think people probably put themselves in the shoes of her parents and her boyfriend, and they thought, if this was happening to our family, then that's exactly what we'd want others to do.
As search teams comb the forest, detectives looking into the vehicle have made a breakthrough.
An officer who had been reviewing the camera footage, the video footage from our traffic cars that were on patrol that night, who came into the briefing room with Steve Fulcher and myself and a few others, and said that they'd identified a taxi leaving the Old Town area with at the right time, and they had the number plate from the traffic car. When they checked that plate, it came back as a dark green Toyota Crevensis on a 57 plate, which was obviously corroborating what we've been told by the other experts. Well, it was a monumental breakthrough. This was then the Tuesday lunchtime, effectively, so we were already some way into the inquiry, but this gave us a very strong suspect.
And that registration plate showed that the car was registered to a man called Christopher Halliwell. Christopher Halliwell was a 47-year-old taxi driver who lived at Ashbury Avenue in Swindon. He was cohabiting with his partner and he had 2 daughters and a son. He didn't stand out to the police as the type of person they were looking for initially. The police immediately wanted to know about the movements of Christopher Halliwell. They wanted to know what fares he took, where he went in his taxi. They wanted to know everything about him.
We look into, was he working at the time, where was his location, his phones, all that kind of thing. But ultimately, at that point, we just had somebody in that area who was driving that car. We didn't know if it was the same car, we didn't know any more than that. But it gave us suspicion that he became someone of interest to us at that point.
They spoke to his bosses, they spoke to the people who ran the taxi rank, and they told police that Halliwell phoned into them at 1:30 a.m. and said he was tired, he was going home, he was knocking off for the night basically. And yet 90 minutes later, his taxi is still seen travelling around the streets of Swindon. Halliwell never went home. So what was he doing during those 90 minutes?
Police decide to conduct surveillance on Halliwell.
The police, bearing in mind they're dealing with a missing person here, they have to have hope that Sian could still be alive, and that if Halliwell has kidnapped her, that she is being kept somewhere but is still alive. The police want to find Sian, they want to rescue Sian, they want to bring her back safely to her family. They hope that by putting Halliwell under surveillance, and Halliwell has no idea that the police are looking at him, the police are hopeful that Halliwell unknowingly leads them to where Sian is. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Halliwell goes about his normal routine. He's working as a taxi driver, he's spending time with his family, he's taking fares and going along with his normal daily routine. However, there were things that he was observed doing whilst under surveillance that firmed up the police interest in him. The police also observed him cleaning out the back of his taxi with a blue fluid. And the police also observed him setting a fire to burn things in the middle of the night, which the police thought was unusual.
They found articles of a cloth material, and one of these was actually the seating from his vehicle, so from the back seat of his car. They were able to find that in one of the bins. So it was just various articles that were being dumped around and about. I believe that the ones in the fire were actually too badly burnt for them to be able to ascertain what they were.
There was an item, a perfume bottle that he discarded into a skip, and whilst taxi drivers would always clean their cars, it was giving us suspicion that this was more than just a routine clean after passengers, that he was going at lengths to try and remove forensic evidence from the car.
I think the most worrying thing, and the thing that struck and a chord with all of us, given that he was our prime suspect at that point, was that he put up posters about Sian in his car. Now, by this time there was national interest, but the local interest was immense in Sian and trying to find her. So posters had been produced and circulated widely, and he'd actually put those up in his taxi, and that was something that was troubling all of us.
So the senior investigating officer, Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher, was working on the hypothesis that Sian was alive and being kept somewhere. This was what's known as a crime in action. So it was very fast moving. They were following Mr. Fulcher, and they were very much relying on members of the public to assist them in their investigation. Whilst following Mr. Halliwell, they were alerted to the fact that he had gone into a supermarket in one of these out-of-town shopping places just on the edge of Swindon.
They observe Halliwell getting out of his vehicle and going into a chemist, and particularly alarming for the police, they observe him leave with a huge quantity of pills. A quantity of pills that police describe as something that you would do if you were planning on ending your life.
Steve Fulcher's concern at that point was that he may be about to attempt suicide, which isn't unheard of in circumstances such as that. And clearly we didn't want that to happen. That wouldn't help us to find Sian, and it would definitely not help her family or her friends gain justice. So the decision was taken to arrest him at that point and to carry out what's known in policing world as an urgent interview.
Urgent interview is where time is running out and the life of the missing person is under threat, and the safety of that person and the chance of recovering that person alive is the main priority. So rather than take the individual to a police station to talk them through their Miranda rights and have them consult with a solicitor, they conduct an urgent interview right there at the scene of arrest.
When questioned, will Christopher Halliwell admit what happened that night and the whereabouts of Sian O'Callaghan? Wiltshire police are investigating the disappearance of 22-year-old Sian O'Callaghan, who went missing in the early hours of March 19, 2011, after a night out in Swindon. Using CCTV, investigators discover that Sian most likely got into a taxi owned by a man named Christopher Halliwell. The senior investigating officer, Steve Fulcher, has Halliwell arrested.
2 officers were sitting in a vehicle. When Mr. Halliwell was arrested, he was put into the back of this vehicle, and straight away these officers asked him a number of questions. Where is Sian? How did she get there? You know, all the sort of questions, trying to ascertain where Sian was.
He wasn't initially forthcoming. Yeah, he simply didn't comment on his involvement at that point. He just said that he wanted to go to the police station. So Steve intervened at that point, because that would have routinely been what would have happened. The urgent interview had effectively been exhausted. There'd always been a suspicion from some of the telephone data we've been able to acquire that he could have been out to Barbary Castle at one point.
Fulcher commands search teams to focus on the areas surrounding Barbary Castle.
Now, Barbary Castle was a beauty spot on the outskirts of Swindon, and Steve had initiated some searches that were taking place. So on that morning, the Thursday morning, there were search teams in and around Barbary Castle.
He made the decision to meet Halliwell and question him himself at that location. So he instructed the detectives to take him there, and he would urgent interview him there. His reasoning for that course of action was he believed that if Halliwell was being taken close to where Sian's body was and speaking to him as the SIO, that he might realise the game's up here and he might cooperate better.
Fulcher's unorthodox approach raises some concerns within the police force.
I support Steve on what he did. It was a very brave decision, and you need courageous SIOs in that scenario. And my role at that point, I actually drove Steve out there along with his PA, who'd been making notes of everything that had been happening over the preceding days. And as I drove him out there, I said to Steve, "Are you really sure you want to do this?" Because it was such an unusual thing. And he looked me in the eyes, really, and he'd spoken to Sian's family, he'd met Sian's family, and he said, "I've promised Sian's family I'm going to get her back, and this is the only way."
Mr. Halliwell gets out of the car and goes off with Detective Superintendent Fulcher, and Mr. Fulcher asks him, "Where's Sian?" Initially, he won't talk to Mr. Fulcher. He won't answer any questions. He keeps saying he wants his solicitor. But eventually, just as Mr. Fulcher thinks he's going to have to give up and take him back to the police station, Mr. Halliwell says, "Have you got a car? I'll take you to her."
After a few minutes, Steve Halliwell and his PA got into a marked car and started to head off from Barbary Castle, and I followed them. And at that point, I thought that we were probably going back to Gable Cross Police Station. I thought we'd probably exhausted that further interview that Steve had with Halliwell. But then what happened is we drove straight past the police station and out towards the Oxfordshire border. And that was the moment that Halliwell was taking Steve to Uffington.
Uffington is also a beautiful rural location in that part of Wiltshire, but at night time, extremely dark. You wouldn't like to be walking about it at night. You could easily get lost or something could happen. It's just that kind of eerie kind of place at night.
And it is literally in the middle of nowhere. It's a very secluded area, lots of green fields and not much else. So they head up to Uffington Whitehorse, where whilst they're driving the car, they drive along a road and Mr. Halliwell says she's down there somewhere, indicating down a slope.
I continued to follow them, and we went out to the location where he had disposed of Sian's body. And when he got to that location, that the car slowed, and Steve got out and said he's not sure exactly where, which to this day, in my view, was a lie. But it's somewhere between this point and the next point I show you. And Halliwell then took them another couple hundred yards down the road. But I think Halliwell was just nervous of showing Steve Fulcher in the cold light of day what he'd done to Sian.
They brought out the search teams to do a proper forensic sweep of the area to see if they could find Sian. And the search officers would have a lead search officer who would dictate exactly what formation they used, and they would, in a very studied manner, they would work their way down the area that Mr. Halliwell had pointed to until they found what they were looking for.
The investigation into Sian's disappearance reaches a devastating end.
When I received a call that he'd taken us to Sian's body, utter despair that she's dead, very pleased that we'd managed to find her. And at that point, I started to put in motion forensic teams to go to the scene, traffic teams to secure the area, all the procedures that you'd normally undertake when a body is found. He disposed of her from the road into a ditch, which was some distance away from the raised road in undergrowth, that it would have been a long time before she was found. I believe that the location was such that even the farmers didn't go into that particular location much, so it would have been some time.
Sian was found naked from the waist down, and she had died as a result of a stab wound to her head. It was a particularly brutal murder.
I hope that he didn't sexually abuse her. The fact that she was naked from the waist down obviously raises that concern. There was never any conclusive evidence to say that she was sexually assaulted. He did whatever he did, and I just hope that he killed her quickly and as far as possible painlessly from Sian's perspective. The fact that he took the steps he did afterwards are chilling. The fact that he chose to put posters of Sian being missing in his car driving around Swindon trying to get other taxi fares goes a lot to say about who he is.
Sadly, I was the one that had to also tell them that Sian had been found. That is something you never get used to. As police officers, we deal with some harsh things that we have to deal with, and what we call passing death messages. This is one of the things that we do, and no matter how many times you do it, it never gets easier. So passing that message that's one of those jobs that will live with me. It doesn't come up in my mind very often, but it's there, and it was hard. They were devastated, but you're there to support them and help them through it. So it was a very difficult case, but I remained with the family throughout the whole of the case.
D.S. Fulcher has the harrowing task of contacting the police station and informing them that they have found Sian O'Callaghan's body. They then send in a team of forensic scientists to preserve the scene, and they make arrangements for Christopher Halliwell to be returned to the police station in Swindon, where he can be read his rights, meet with his solicitor, and then undergo questioning. They are still at the scene where Sean O'Callaghan's body was found. He and D.S. Fulcher, in that short period of time together, had built up somewhat of a rapport together. D.S. Fulcher had successfully got inside Halliwell's head and had gained some trust. They are sharing a cigarette, and Halliwell leans into D.S. Fulcher and said, "Me and you should have a chat." And D.S. Fulcher, not knowing what was coming, said, "Yes, okay, what do you want to talk about?" Perhaps thinking Halliwell was going to give more details about Sean's case, he instead says to D.S. Fulcher, "Do you want another one?" And D.S. Fulcher inquires, "Another what?" To which Halliwell replies, "Another body."
Steve then came over to me and said that he was going to take us to another. And I had to clarify, what do you mean another? And he said to another body, which at that point you could literally have struck me down with lightning. That was not what I was expecting to happen.
Christopher Halliwell's admission forces investigators to confront the chilling possibility that they may be dealing with a serial killer.
To find one body is shocking. To be told that there's a second, I don't think many police officers would have that in their career. And I told the senior officer straight away, the deputy chief constable at the time, and had to inform them that this was the case. And straight away that led us to believe that, this was going to be bigger than we initially thought.
D.S. Fulcher found himself in such a precarious position because he had a number of choices to make and so little time to make them, because this was a moment in time. This is a moment in time between two people, two individuals, between a killer and the detective hunting him down. And the killer has all the power because the killer has the knowledge. The detective wants the knowledge. He has to make the decision on what way to go, because if he goes off path either way, the whole moment could be over. The whole moment could be ruined, and the information that he really needs could be lost forever. He decides to break away from the PACE protocols. The PACE protocols are the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1985. He decides to break away from that and decides to go along with Halliwell and question him without arresting him for this new confession. Doesn't read him his rights, doesn't get him a solicitor. He decides to take that risk for moral reasons, because he knows, I have the chance here to uncover the body of a human being that's also missing.
It is a decision that jeopardizes Fulcher's career.
Fulcher has the position of, if he takes Halliwell back, procedure dictates, PACE regulations, that you have to take the individual back, formally charge them, offer them a lawyer, read them their rights, and a process has to go through for a police investigation to start. However, he has created this unique bond with this violent killer, and he's aware that this bond is fragile. He's aware that this stream of information, which had previously not appeared from Halliwell, or indeed at any other point in the case, might only exist in that moment. It might only exist there and then, in this forlorn place that they're standing, where this poor young life had been snuffed out. And he's in a position where he is stood there with Halliwell, looking at this killer, knowing that this information wasn't available 10 minutes ago, and it might never be available again.
Detective Superintendent Fulcher thought, I'm going to go with this. So they got back into a vehicle, and Mr. Halliwell directed him out to a field, again in the middle of nowhere, in Gloucestershire. And he said, there's a body in that field. And following an excavation by police, they located the remains of another female called Becky Godden Edwards.
In a shocking twist, Christopher Halliwell leads Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher to a second body. However, as Halliwell has not been read his Miranda rights, the case has become significantly more complicated. In the early hours of March 19, 2011, 22-year-old Sian O'Callaghan disappears after a night out in Swindon. CCTV shows her getting into a taxi driven by Christopher Halliwell, who is later arrested. Detective Steve Fulcher brings Halliwell to a search site near Barbary Castle, where Halliwell eventually reveals where he buried Sian. But just as they're about to return to the station, he leads Fulcher to the body of another young woman.
The body that was recovered in Eastleach was that of Becky Godden Edwards, a young woman in her early 20s who disappeared on the 27th of December 2002 after being seen getting into a taxi outside a nightclub in Swindon. Becky had a loving family around her. She was very well loved, very well liked, popular young woman, but unfortunately she had fallen on some hard times around the time of her disappearance.
I still believe we would never have found Sian and we would never have found Becky if it weren't for the intervention of Steve and the urgent interview.
Halliwell confesses what happened the night he abducted Becky to investigators at the scene.
Halliwell explained in very simple, concise language that he'd taken Becky from Swindon, that he'd driven her out to where we were, that he'd killed her, that he'd indicated that he'd strangled her. He indicated that he'd left her behind the wall and we were stood in the field with a wall as the boundary. And he then explained that he'd come back the following day and that's when he'd buried her. And he indicated to Steve and I the point where he buried her. And what stands in me, and which I'll never forget, it was his eyes. So he had blue eyes and they were piercing and steely, and he was very matter-of-fact in what he told us.
There's been a lot of speculation about whether Christopher Halliwell has killed more people, and I know Steve Fulcher believes he has. I know of some of the inquiries that have gone on since then, and to date nothing has been found to show that he has killed anybody else. He'd have had a lot of lone female passengers during that time, and I suspect if you're subsequently one of those and you knew that he was later convicted of double murders, you'd be very concerned.
Well, there was a brief discussion about whether or not there was anyone else that he needed to take us to, and the words that he used were something very similar to "not today," which stays with me as well. But at that point, Steve, I think, felt that we had to sort of draw under a line under what was happening. So Steve and Halliwell went back in the police car and they went off and to Cable Cross police station.
The trial is delayed due to Detective Fulcher's actions during the investigation.
So Mr. Halliwell would have been taken the following day. He would have been remanded in custody and he would have been taken the following day to the magistrate's court, where again he would have been remanded in custody for further investigations and for the trial, for preparation for the trial. During the course of the investigation, one of the avenues they had to go down was a thing called a voir dire. This was when they went to court to hear the facts of the case, and the facts of the case were around where Mr. Halliwell was not given access to a solicitor and where he was not cautioned when he should have been. So this had to be heard in front of a judge. Now this hearing took five days, and during that they were given all the evidence. Mr. Fulcher was given his opportunity to put forward why he didn't comply with the requirements of an arrested person. The judge, however, in this case ruled for Mr. Halliwell and said that anything from the point of his initial urgent interview, anything after that was not allowed as evidence within the case. So this included pointing out where Sian was, and it included pointing out where Becky Godden Edwards was. Thankfully, they had a fair amount of other evidence forensic evidence in relation to the murder of Sian, and they were able to build a case around her murder. However, around Becky Gordon-Edwards, there was only the word of Mr. Halliwell, who had taken them to the field where she was located. So they had to disallow that from the hearings that went to the first trial at court. Yes, they had their daughter returned to them, but it also meant that the person who had admitted to killing her by taking officers to the field where she was buried, that evidence was not allowed, and there was no trial in relation to her.
Christopher Halliwell appears in court on the 31st of May 2012 for the murder of Sian O'Callaghan and pleads not guilty.
I think is well known. It took many years for this case to come to court for a number of reasons, but the trial from memory is 2016. I gave evidence immediately after Steve Fulcher, and that was quite challenging really, for as is his right, Halliwell had sacked his defence team and represented himself at his trial. And when Steve Fulcher had finished giving his evidence, Halliwell had made some really unsavoury comments towards Steve, basically gloated in the fact that he felt he'd ruined Steve's career, which is a bizarre and random thing for anyone to take pleasure in, but that was what Halliwell did. But those comments and statements caused a bit of a ripple through the court, certainly through the public gallery.
He represented himself in court, which made the spectacle even more unbearable for the families of Sian and Becky, and the performance of watching him wriggle around details, denial, failure to answer any questions. This was a man who didn't feel any level of shame at what he'd done or at what he was accused of.
His demeanour in court was what you would expect from a hardened criminal, from an utterly depraved, evil man. He was smirking at family members. He was looking quite relaxed, like he hadn't a care in the world, like he was totally free from worry. He didn't really care.
His defence was that she attacked him, and it was self-defence. That was a man just trying to grasp onto anything that he could think of in those moments when he knew he was going to be convicted and face a full life tariff.
19th October 2012. Christopher Halliwell pleads guilty to her murder. He is sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years.
It's indescribable. Unless you've been through it yourself, you can't ever really relate to it. We could all imagine what it would be like to lose a loved one, but not many people will have lost a loved one in these circumstances. And that will be very, very difficult for anyone to come to terms with. And you have to admire the families of Sian and Becky for the way they have handled coming to terms with what Halliwell did to them.
As Halliwell is being transported from the prison to the court, there are people on the streets. The community are out and they are angry. They are throwing things at the prison van. They are banging their fists off the prison van side. There is a level of anger and outpouring of rage at what this man has done. It is reminiscent of similar actions from the public when you're dealing with particularly infamous criminals who have carried out some truly horrific crimes. So that demonstrates the level of infamy that Halliwell was beginning to attain and the anger that the public had for him in Swindon.
Killers very often don't look or appear outwardly evil. They look entirely like normal people moving amongst all of us. And when people are confronted with the horror of this individual, a man that was driving a taxi that was potentially capable of taking any number of individuals in the course of their job, driving around the town, people's feelings, emotions about the case reached boiling point. There had been murals around Swindon of Sian's likeness. She was called Swindon's Angel. There was vigils, there was candles lit everywhere, commemorations in churches. Her name and her memory were constantly on local news, radio, national news.
police did an amazing job. They very quickly ascertained the vehicle that was being used, and this was great police work to have the forethought to look through the ANPR cameras on traffic vehicles, and then Detective Superintendent Fulcher locating him, arresting him before he was able to do anything with the tablets which potentially he had bought to harm himself. You know, the police work was fabulous. There are questions around the way Mr. Halliwell was dealt with when he was apprehended, but ultimately 2 women were returned to their families because of the actions that he took that day.
I think it's well documented and well publicised that other SIOs would have dealt with this case differently. I'd go as far as saying that I don't know any other SIO who would have taken the steps that Steve did when he went out to Barbary Castle. But perhaps that's a reflection on us rather than Steve, because what I would say as well is that if one of my daughters went missing, I'd want Steve to investigate it, because I'd have the confidence that he would find her, and that's what happened in this case.